classes of organisms. Same, that is, you see similar antigens in different classes of organisms. For example, Proteus and rickettsial species share a common antigen. So that is used in this. That's a principle of doing this wheel Felix reaction, where you use Proteus antigens uh, to detect a rickettsial disease. Another example is Paul Bunner test used in the diagnosis of or Epstein-Barr virus infection. So these are the heterophile antigen tests. Again, another MCQ, heterophile antigens. Then comes the T cell independent and the T cell dependent antigen. So as the name says, T cell independent antigens means there will be no role for this T cells in presenting this antigen to the B cells. As you can see, directly this B cells, I mean antigen is coming and binding to the B cells. Whereas in T cell dependent antigen, the antigen processing is needed, and then uh, T cells will produce interleukins, which will stimulate the B cells, and the production of antibody ensues. So there is a role for T cell in stimulating the production of antibodies in the case of T cell dependent antigens. Okay, so and this is said to be better than the T cell independent antigens because we will have immunological memory associated with this type of immune response, and also high titers of antibody, and all classes of antibody will be produced, meaning IgM, IgG, all these classes will be produced if it is a T cell dependent antigen. Okay, so role of T cells in stimulation or stimulating the production of B cells, that is through this interleukins, and this is a better immune response because there is immunological memory, and all classes of immunoglobulins can be produced by this. Another important topic in antigens is a super antigen. So usually T cell will recognize an antigen only when processed or presented through MHC. So T cell receptor is the this MHC is presenting the antigen, peptide antigen to the T cell. This is how usually an antigen is presented. And so once this antigen is presented, the corresponding T cells will be activated and an immune response ensues. See, in the case of super antigen, you can see that it is not being presented in the usual way by your antigen presenting cell. It is just binding laterally to the V beta chain of the T cell receptor. V beta chain of the T cell receptor. Laterally it is binding. So what happens here is following this type of binding with the T cell receptor, different classes of T cells without any epitope specificity, different classes of T cells will be stimulated, and that leads to an immune response. So this is how a super antigen binds, and that leads to stimulation of different types of T cells and not epitope specific T cells. So our toxic shock syndrome toxin produced by our Staphylococcus aureus, that's an example for a super antigen. Then antibody. So antibody, we have two heavy chains and two light chain for an antibody. And as you can see, there will be variable and constant region. So variable region is the area where the antibody goes and binds with the antigen. So it will be variable so that it can bind to different antigen. Okay, so you can see that variable region is the part that makes actual contact with the antigen. Okay. And how do you name an immunoglobulin? What is it based on? Naming of an antibody. So you name it as IgM, IgG, and so on. What is it based on? Anybody? How do you name an immunoglobulin? We have IgM, IgG, IgA, and so on. So what is it based on? Okay, so usually we name the antibodies based on the heavy chains that they possess. So if your antibody has a new chain, I mean, new chain, you call it as a IgM antibody. If it has alpha chain, you call it as the IgA antibody. So the naming is based on the heavy chains that they possess. And an antibody will have either a kappa or lambda light chain. Okay, light chains either kappa or lambda. And naming is based on heavy chains, presence of new chains being IgM, and so on. And important points about immunoglobulins. So IgM in acute infection, IgM is the antibody. It's the first synthesized by the fetus. Again, that's a commonly asked MCQ, which is the first antibody synthesized by fetus, IgM, which is the antibody produced in congenital infection. So that's IgM because it's the first antibody synthesized by the fetus. And as you can see, it has 5 different antibody molecules attached by J chain. So this is called as a millionaire molecule because it's molecular weight approaches 1 million. Okay, so IgM is called as the millionaire molecule. And IgA, so here you can see a dimeric IgA. When a dimeric IgA is seen, it is called as the secretory IgA, which is associated with mucosal immunity. Okay, so secretory IgA is dimeric, and that is the one associated with mucosal immunity. IgE is associated with type 1 hypersensitivity reactions, and it is seen to be elevated in helminthic infections. Helminthic infections. Now, this is a 5 marks question. So monoclonal antibody, how it is produced, what are the different types of monoclonal antibody, what are the uses of a monoclonal antibody, meaning it has diagnostic, therapeutic, and other uses. So you should know that, and how it is produced. That technology is called as the hybridoma technology. So in very simple terms, what you do here is you are combining this splenic cells of mouse, which is already sensitized by an antigen of interest, and that spleen cells are taken because it will be producing the corresponding antibody. That is fused with the myeloma cells, which has the property of incessant multiplication, and that hybridoma cell will be producing monoclonal antibody. So combining splenic cells with the myeloma cells, that's how hybridoma technology works. So remember, it's a very important question. You have to write under these headings: explain the hybridoma technology, which are the types of different monoclonal antibodies and the uses of monoclonal antibodies. Moving on to antigen-antibody reactions, this Prozone phenomenon and lattice hypothesis. This is one thing that you have to know before you move on to the whole of these antigen-antibody reactions like agglutination, precipitation, etc. So as you can see, uh, there is a figure where there is an antibody excess, where there is an antigen excess, and where the number of antibody equals to that of the antigen, which we call it as the zone of equivalence. So lattice formation occurs when antigen molecules equal to that of the antibody molecule. Then only we'll have a visible reaction. Okay, so whenever a visible agglutination or precipitation occurs, that means that's the point where you have equal number of antigen and antibody molecule. So zone of equivalence or lattice formation is important. Prozone phenomenon means there will be antibody excess. Say, for example, a person is presenting with enteric fever. He has presenting in the second week of fever, so he will be producing large quantities of antibody. So you are adding the antigen to his serum sample. If the antigen is very less, or if you have an antibody excess because of high titers of antibody produced by this patient, you will get a false negative result. So you have high titers of antibody, but the antigen that you have added to the serum of the patient is very less. There happens the prozone phenomenon. In order to avoid this, what we do is we do serial dilution of the patient's serum, so that at some point the number of antibody molecules will equal to that of the antigen molecule. Okay, so that is very important, this prozone phenomenon. And the most important difference between agglutination and precipitation reaction, again, that's very important. Agglutination, it involves, so the only difference is in the antigen, type of the antigen. So agglutination means it is an insoluble or particulate antigen combining with the antibody at the appropriate pH and temperature. So common examples, we have blood grouping for slide agglutination and tube agglutination test. A very important examples, Vidal standard agglutination test for brucellosis and Coombs test. These are the examples for agglutination. And in precipitation, as I said, the difference is only in the antigen. So we have soluble antigens here. Soluble antigens are involved in precipitation. Again, important tests are the VDRL, which is a slide flocculation test, then immunodiffusion, countercurrent immunoelectrophoresis. All these uses the principle of precipitation. And among this, one commonly asked question is this VDRL. VDRL is an example for slide flocculation test. Slide flocculation test, which comes under precipitation. Okay, have I changed the slide? Can you see the slide now? Now I am projecting this latex agglutination test slide. Can you see that?
Ma'am, now the difference between agglutination and precipitation
Hello?
reactions.
Which is the slide? Can you see the slide of latex agglutination test?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, so now what is latex agglutination test? So I told you that this agglutination that involves insoluble antigen. So when you are adding a latex particle to an antibody, so what happens is it becomes an insoluble antigen. If you are adding it to the antigen or antibody, whatever, if you are trying to find out the antigen, you add this lattice particle will be coated with antibodies, and if you are finding the antibodies, then the antigen will be coated with the latex particle. Anyway, we want to have an insoluble thing because agglutination reactions are easier to perform. So you're converting a precipitation reaction into an agglutination reaction. So the antibodies are latex particles are coated with antibodies to CRP. The patient's serum contains CRP. You get a visible agglutination. Okay, so the reason why you are performing this latex agglutination is that it's easier to perform. The agglutination tests are easier to perform. So you're just converting precipitation reaction into agglutination reaction. Then another important question is ELISA. Very important question. So here you are supposed to write the different types of ELISA, meaning direct ELISA, indirect sandwich. So many types are there, and examples for each of these. Like for example, or we can do a direct ELISA to find out the antibodies against dengue virus and so on. So direct, indirect ELISA, how you perform that we have to know the principle of each of these. So this is one simple demonstration or simple way to explain how an ELISA works. So here you can see that there is a microtiter plate. That's what we use for ELISA. This microtiter plate is coated with antigen, say dengue antigen. Okay. Now you have to find out we want to find out the IgM antibodies in the patient. Okay. So we have a microtiter plate coated with antigen. You are adding the patient's antibody. Okay. So if there are antibodies in the patient's serum, it will come and bind with this antigen. Now we have to find out whether this antigen antibody reaction has occurred. So the next two steps, it's to find out whether this antigen antibody reaction has occurred. For that, we have a secondary antibody conjugate. So you can see that the secondary antibody conjugate is conjugated with an enzyme. Okay, and into that you are adding the substrate on which this enzyme acts, and the substrate will change its color. Okay, so all these occurs only if there is an antibody in your serum which has bound to the antigen on the microtiter plate. Okay, so this is a This is simply how you can explain ELISA reaction. Antigen, antibody, and a secondary antibody conjugate is the into which you add the substrate, which will change the color if there is antibody in the serum of the patient. So that's how ELISA works. Next is complement pathway. Again, that's a 4 marks or 8 marks question they can ask you. And also, so many MCQs are also asked from this complement pathway. So we know that we have a classical pathway, a lectin pathway, and an alternative pathway. And one of the simplest questions asked is how many complement components are there? So we have C1 to 9. So there are 9 complement pathway components. Okay, 9 complement components. And they proceed like C1 to C9, except that after C1 comes C4. Okay, C1, C4, and 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They go on like that. Now you have to know the activators of each pathway. Like for example, for classical pathway, antigen antibody complex is a activating factor. DNA CRP also, and all these are activators of classical pathway. Whereas alternative IgD, etc., which are activators of the alternative pathway. And lectin pathway, so they have the mannose binding lectins present on the surface of organisms like Salmonella and Neisseria. Those are the activators of the lectin pathway. Okay, so activators you should know. And then the next question asked is, what is the C3 convertase of
എക്സ്ക്യൂസ്
ah,
മാം
yes,
മാം സ്ലൈഡ് ചേഞ്ച് ആവുന്നില്ല മാം.
change ആവുന്നില്ലേ?
ആ,
ഇപ്പൊ എന്താ
ഇപ്പൊ
കാണുന്നത്?
കോംപ്ലിമെന്റ് പാത്വേയാണ് ഇപ്പൊ. അതിന്റെ മുന്നേ ലാക്ടസ് അഗ്ലൂട്ടിനേഷന്റെ സ്ലൈഡ്
എലൈസ കണ്ടില്ലായിരുന്നോ?
ഇല്ല ഇല്ല.
ഇപ്പൊ കാണാമോ എലൈസ?
ഇപ്പൊ കോംപ്ലിമെന്റ് പാത്വേ കാണുന്ന മാം.
ഇപ്പോഴും കോംപ്ലിമെന്റ് ആണോ?
അതെ അതെ.
ആക്ച്വലി എന്റെ സ്ക്രീനിൽ ഇപ്പൊ ഞാൻ ഐ ഹാവ് പ്രൊജക്റ്റഡ് എലൈസയുടെ സ്ലൈഡ് ആണ് ഇപ്പോ.
മാം ഒന്ന് സ്ലൈഡ് ഷെയറിംഗ് ഓഫ് ആക്കിയിട്ട് പിന്നെ ഒരു പ്രാവശ്യം കൂടെ ഓൺ ആക്കോ?
ഞാൻ ഓഫ് ആക്കിയിട്ട് ഒന്നുകൂടെ ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട്. ഇപ്പോഴോ?
ഇപ്പൊ ലാറ്റക്സ് അഗ്ലൂട്ടിനേഷൻ
ഇപ്പൊ ഞാൻ ചേഞ്ച് ചെയ്തു. എലൈസ ആയോ?
ഇപ്പോഴും ലാറ്റക്സ് അഗ്ലൂട്ടിനേഷനാ കാണിക്കുന്നത്.
ഇല്ല മാം.
ഇല്ല. ഇപ്പൊ കോംപ്ലിമെന്റ് ആയോ? ഇപ്പോഴും ഒരു മിനിറ്റ്, ഒന്ന് സ്റ്റോപ്പ് ചെയ്തിട്ട് ഒന്നുകൂടെ നോക്കാം. ഓക്കെ, ഞാൻ ഒന്നുകൂടെ ഷെയർ ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട്. ഇപ്പൊ എങ്ങനെയുണ്ട്? ഏതാ? ഹലോ, ഇപ്പൊ ഏതാ കാണുന്നത്?
മാം വന്നിട്ടില്ല ഇതുവരെ.
ഇപ്പൊ എലൈസ ആണോ?
വന്നിട്ടില്ല.
ഒന്നും കാണുന്നില്ല മാം.
ഇപ്പൊ കാണാമോ?
ആ യെസ് മാം.
Yes, ma'am.
എലിസ കാണാം.
ഇപ്പൊ ഏതാ കാണുന്നത്? എലൈസ ആണോ?
എലൈസ കാണാം.
Okay. Okay, so ELISA once again. So we have the microtiter plate with antigen coated on that. You are adding the serum from the patient. The serum from the patient contains the antibody, which will obviously go and bind with the antigen. Okay, the next two steps are to find out whether this antigen antibody react. I mean, the antibody has gone and attached to the antigen. So for that, we have a secondary antibody conjugate. And as you can see, this is conjugated with the enzyme. So when you add the substrate, this enzyme will change the color of the substrate. So when there is a change in the color of the substrate, it just means that there is antibody in the serum of the patient. If there is no antibody in the serum, then what happens? None of these reactions will take place. So there won't be any change in the color of the substrate. So that's how ELISA works. So this is the complement. I think you have already seen this slide. So we have seen the activators. Now, as I said, the next question is about the C3 convertase. So you have to remember that all these steps, it's a cascade. So the preceding the steps will act as a catalyst for the subsequent steps. For example, when C1, so you have the C1, after that comes the C4 in classical pathway. So the C1 and C4 together, they will catalyze the next step, that is converting or activating the C2 of the pathway. Okay, so the preceding steps will act as catalyst for the subsequent steps. So as you can see, so we have before 3 we have C1, 4 and 2, is it not? So the C3 convertase can be named as C4b2A. And what about this B and A? How can you remember whether it is B or A that you have to add to the pathway? So for that, you just have to remember one thing: the anaphylotoxins produced during this pathway, they are C3A, C4A, and C5A. Meaning, these anaphylotoxins, they won't join this cascade; they will be released to the system. So none of the enzymes should have 3A, 4A, or 5A in their names. As you can see, C3 convertase is C4b2A because 3A, 4A, and 5A are the anaphylotoxins. So remember it like that, then it's easy to write whether it is A or B that you have to write. Okay, so that's C3 convertase, C4b2A. That's the C3 convertase in classical pathway. And alternative pathway. Why it is called as alternative pathway? This is because the alternative pathway does not require the participation of C1, 4 or 2 for activation of C3. Okay, it does not require the participation of C1 or 4 or 2 for the activation of C3. So as you can see, this is proceeding like factor B will be the, factor D will be the, that's how C3 is getting activated. So that's why it's called as the alternative pathway. Okay, and next question is which forms the membrane attack complex? C5 to 9 forms the membrane attack complex. That is, pores will be formed in the cells by this. It's called as the membrane attack complex. C5 to 9 is the membrane attack complex. Moving on to the next, the structure of immune system. To know these things, you have been studying from first year onwards, the central and peripheral lymphoid organs, the different cells of the immune system. Here we will learn see in bit of a detail about the MHC. So this is class 1 MHC and class 2 MHC. You should know to draw the diagram of this. Again, it's very easy. So class 1 MHC and class 2 both have alpha and beta chains. And look at the picture of class 1 MHC. This alpha has got alpha 1, alpha 2 and alpha 3 domains, and beta has a beta 2 microglobulin. Okay, alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 3 domains and a beta 2 microglobulin. And antigen will be presented between this alpha 1 and alpha 2. Okay, between alpha 1 and alpha 2. Z or MHC. Yes?
Slide change.
You have this skin tests and you have this skin tests and all, and also wrist and rash, allergosorbent, immunosorbent assays are there. And treatment, when you write about the treatment of anaphylaxis, and you have to write about the treatment of anaphylaxis as also as that of atopy, meaning you have to add antihistamines and all along with the adrenaline. You have to add all that anaphylaxis, adrenaline. For other atopy, antihistamines, cromolyn, sodium, etc. etc. So all that should come in the answer, not just anaphylaxis, write about atopy as well. Then type 2 hypersensitivity and type 3, they are almost similar in that an antibody will come and bind to a surface antigen on a cell. Okay, so that's what happens in type 2 hypersensitivity. Antibody coming and binding to the antigen on the cell. So that will result in complement mediated activation, antibody dependent cell mediated cytotoxicity. Something will happen and that cell will be lysed. Okay, it could be either complement mediated or NK cell mediated or opsonization and phagocytosis. Anything can happen, but antibody is coming and binding to the antigen on your cell. Common examples are bioincompatibility, RH incompatibility, and autoimmune hemolytic anemia. These are the important examples of type 2 hypersensitivity. So antibody coming and binding to the antigen on the cell surface. Type 3 almost same as type 2, except that this antigen antibody complement, they will circulate in your system and they get deposited in the various organs. And depending upon the system in which they are getting deposited, if it is kidneys, you get glomerulonephritis, some other organ that symptom. So you have to remember type 3 like that, circulating immune. Classical examples are Arthur's reaction and serum sickness, where you get circulating immune complexes. Okay, antigen antibody complement complexes. And so type 1, 2, and 3 involves different antibodies. 1 involves IgE antibody, 2 and 3 IgG antibody, and type 4 involves the T lymphocyte. It's called as the delayed hypersensitivity. So which are the cells involved in type 4 hypersensitivity? Again, important. Remember, it is the T cells and macrophages which are involved in type 4 hypersensitivity. And your Mantoux test is an example for type 4 hypersensitivity, and contact dermatitis. That's another example that you can show for type 4 hypersensitivity. Okay, so cell mediated during. Hello? ഏതാണ്? ഓക്കെ, ഇപ്പൊ ഞാൻ ചേഞ്ച് ചെയ്യുമ്പോൾ ചേഞ്ച് ആവുന്നുണ്ട്. ഇപ്പൊ ടൈപ്പ് 3 ടൈപ്പ് 4 അങ്ങനെയൊക്കെ ആവുന്നല്ലോ അല്ലേ? Okay. So type 4 hypersensitivity, the cells involved are macrophages and T lymphocyte, and examples are tuberculin test and contact dermatitis. Then autoimmunity, again another important question. Autoimmunity can be asked as a short essay, so you have to write about the different mechanisms of autoimmunity, give examples for systemic autoimmune diseases like SLE, and just mention the pathogenesis. Then there are single organ or cell type autoimmune diseases like autoimmune hemolytic anemia is there, myasthenia gravis is there. So all these, again, autoimmunity, very, very important. That mechanisms of autoimmunity, definitely you have to be thorough with that. And immunodeficiency, I won't ask you to spend so much time to learn these immunodeficiency diseases. You should know that when somebody is asking to write about immunodeficiency disease, they are asking about the primary immunodeficiency disease, meaning the main defect is in the immune system itself, okay, and not due to some secondary disease like HIV or immune suppression following organ transplantation and all. Okay, so primary immunodeficiency disease means something is wrong with the immune system as such. Okay, so we have diseases affecting the cell-mediated immunity, humoral immunity, and so on. The most commonly asked questions are about the DiGeorge syndrome and the severe combined immunodeficiency. So this DiGeorge syndrome, that involves the cell-mediated immunodeficiency. So just go through the chart of different immunodeficiency diseases. That will be enough for immunodeficiency. Then moving on to the last parts of this immunology. So here you have transplant and cancer immunology. You have the allograft rejection. So explain the allograft rejection, where in first response. First response means you are receiving an organ from a donor for the first time. So what happens after revascularization? Your cellular infiltration occurs and your graft will be removed. So that happens in first set response. In second set response, second set means you are receiving an organ from the same donor as the first time. So what happens is, without any attempt at revascularization, it results in cellular infiltration and allograft rejection. So it happens fast when you are getting a second um, organ from the same donor as the first set response. Okay, so first response is the first time that happens, and second set response means it is happening a second time. So accelerated graft rejection occurs here. Okay, and now we have like this also it is asked hyperacute rejection. That's a commonly asked question, MCQ. So that happens in minutes to hours. Hyperacute rejection. So preformed antibodies will be there in his system. So that will result in hyperacute. And acute rejection, which usually takes weeks to months, T cells are involved. Again, very important. It's a normal. I mean, that's the type of rejection that we were talking about. Acute rejection taking weeks to months, T cells are involved. And chronic rejection, months to years, T cells as well as antibodies will be involved in this. Okay, so hyperacute, that has been asked once, minutes to hours, preformed antibodies. So it takes minutes to hours for the rejection to be complete. And tumor specific antigen, so I'm not going to the details of that. This will be discussed in the pathology. So you should remember that tumor specific means it is specific for the tumor, and tumor associated means it could be seen in other conditions, or like for example prostate specific antigen. It's a TATA, meaning in benign prostatic conditions its level will be elevated but not as elevated as that in a prostatic cancer. So that type of antigens we call as tumor associated transplantation antigens. Okay, so that finishes the slides that I have prepared for immunology. Any other clarifications required in immunology? Anything else that and I mean, I think I have covered the commonly asked questions. If you have any other queries, you can ask now. If nothing else, so we'll move on to the next part. So next, moving on to enteric fever. So here are some clues which will help you. Enteric fever, obviously, it's an essay question. So these are some clues which will help you to identify the disease as well as the organism. So stepladder fever, that's usually associated with enteric fever. So your question will have the patient presenting with fever. It was stepladder pyrexia, and he had hepatosplenomegaly, headache, and myalgia. And another point that was noted was relative bradycardia. So with this, I can safely write that your diagnosis is enteric fever. Okay, and this also very important: the time of the disease and the tests that you will ask for the patient. That is, the patient is presenting in the first week, the best method is to do a blood culture. So we have the conventional and the automated methods available. If the patient is presenting in the second week, antibodies will have appeared, so you go for wider reaction. And third and fourth week, you can do the stool culture and the urine culture. And when you mention stool culture, write about the enrichment media like tetrathianate drop and selective media like XLD, etc., Wilson and Blair's, etc. So make sure that you write all these points. And this is easy to remember which test to do, perform in which week. BASU, BASU, blood culture first week, antibody second week, stool third week, and urine culture fourth week. And other samples that can be used for testing is bone marrow and duodenal aspirate. Bone marrow and duodenal aspirate. And whenever you write culture, you have to add a note on identification of the growth as well as antimicrobial susceptibility testing. That's for every question. Okay, so you are doing culture on blood agar, you are doing culture on enriched, selective media and all. Finally, you have to write a line like this: identification of the growth. So you can do conventional biochemical tests, or if uh, there are facilities available, you can even go for Madita. And for organisms like Salmonella, Shigella, and Vibrio, please note for organisms Salmonella, Shigella, and Vibrio, you can use anti-sera to type the isolate as well. Okay, Salmonella, Shigella, and Vibrio, you can add in the identification that you can do a typing with anti-sera. Okay, so that can also be added. And whenever you write about lab diagnosis of enteric fever, remember to add detection of carrier state as well. So it's not only about the patient. You have to write about detection of carrier state as well. Okay, so that's another point that we usually miss. We write about the case, about the patient, the different tests that we are performing, but we forget about the carrier state. So carrier state detection again is very important. So you can do stool and bile culture for fecal carriers, urine culture for urinary carriers. So you will have to do repeated enrichment, repeated sample taking and all for carrier state detection. But of course, you can do culture. And VIDA is of no use in case of carriers. We detect another antibody called as the VI antibody. Again, very important. VI antibodies used in detection of carrier state. Then when there is a proper sewage system and all, you can try isolating salmonella from the sewage system by membrane filtration, Seaver SAP technique, etc. So remember to add detection of carrier state as well. Okay. Next important essay question that can be asked is leptospirosis. So always there will be a clue to this leptospirosis, like agriculture worker or miner. Why? Because our uh, rodents usually contaminate this water sources, and when you walk through minor abrasions, these leptospires enter your body. So that's why you get a clue like that: agriculture workers or miners presenting with fever, myalgia, conjunctival suffusion, jaundice. So can again easily you can write it as leptospirosis. And leptospirosis pathogenesis, again, that's very simple pathogenesis. We have a septicemic phase where vascular damage and invasion of tissues occur, and an immune phase where antibodies start appearing. So that's how you write the pathogenesis. Then this lab diagnosis is different from other organisms. Like as you can see, microscopy. You can take blood and CSF urine for diagnosis. For microscopy, leptospires you cannot stain with the usual gram stain or anything. We need a silver impregnation technique, or you can go for dark ground illumination because they are spirochetes. Okay, and medium is also, don't write blood agar, chocolate agar and all, which we usually write for all the organisms. But here you have a special media called as the EMJH media. And mainstay of diagnosis for leptospirosis is ELISA immunochromatography test, or the CART test, which is a genus specific test. And we have serovar specific test, meaning okay, you actually point to the correct serovar which is causing the disease. For that, you will need a microscopic agglutination test. So here comes another MCQ question. Serovar specific test for leptospirosis is, that is microscopic agglutination test. Okay, so that's lab diagnosis. The next important question is HIV. Obviously, won't have any difficulty in arriving at any diagnosis. So, multiple sexual partners, chronic diarrhea, loss of weight, oral thrush, some clue will be there that will help you to arrive at a diagnosis. For HIV, so the main things, all of you know, this screening test, supplemental test, and the confirmatory test, all other. And you can also add CD4 count and how you diagnose opportunistic infection. Name some common opportunistic infection and write about the test for that. A few, that's all. But the main point that you forget to write is about the NACO strategies for testing. So if there is a question like for HIV diagnosis, what they usually when we are given answer key to mark to evaluate your answer sheets, it will be specifically written that half of the mark is for the test and half of the marks is for NACO strategy. So if you do not mention the NACO strategy, that half mark will be 50% of the marks will be gone. So remember, whenever you are writing lab diagnosis of HIV, include the NACO strategy. 1A, strategy 1, 2A, 2B, and 3. So read about the strategies and write about that as well. Don't forget to mention the NACO strategy. And then some MCQs here in window period, which is the test and which is a serological test that will be helpful. So you can do P24 antigen assay. Of course, all the other confirmatory tests will help you during window period, but P24 antigen it's easy to perform. You can even perform an ELISA or an ICT. That's why specifically they ask for that. And pediatric HIV infection, in order to find out the newborn is actually infected with HIV, you do a HIV DNA detection rather than going for RNA. HIV RNA that could be passively received from the mother, the infant need not be infected. But when you see HIV DNA, meaning replication is taking place in the newborn, that means it is pediatric HIV infection. So that is again important. Moving on to dengue. In dengue, the important features that we have to remember is there will be fever, rash, and retroorbital pain and myalgia. These are the usual symptoms that they give: fever, rash, retroorbital pain, myalgia, and headache. So that is very characteristic of dengue. Dengue pathogenesis, again, it's very easy. You write about primary dengue and secondary dengue, and don't forget to mention the antibody dependent enhancement. So that means the non-neutralizing antibodies actually contribute to pathogenesis by protecting the virus. So as the name indicates, non-neutralizing means they won't be neutralizing the virus. So what they usually do is it protects the virus from the host immune system, and there will be increased cytokine release that will lead to the pathogenesis. So dengue is very important. It's very easy to write the pathogenesis once you know that you have to include all these things in the pathogenesis. And lab diagnosis, again, easy. For most of the viruses, you remember the headings like antigen detection, antibody detection, isolation of the virus, molecular method. Okay, so remember it like that. So that applies for almost all the viral infection. So here the antigen, important antigen of dengue virus is NS1 antigen. You can do ELISA or immunochromatography test. Antibody detection, MAC ELISA can be capture ELISA. That's the MAC ELISA that can be performed. You can find IgM and IgG separately. And for antibody detection, again, a neutralization can be done. And virus isolation for dengue, it goes well in mosquito cell lines. So C636 cell lines are used. And molecular method, where specimens are available, you can do an RT-PCR. So this is how you describe the lab diagnosis. And these are the other viruses causing hemorrhagic fever. KFD is important because it is there in our neighboring state Karnataka. So read about KFD. The other important ones are Ebola, Marburg, and hantavirus. Moving on to malarial parasite. So parasitology, most often, if you remember the life cycle of a parasite, it's very easy to answer the questions on that parasite. So if you remember the life cycle, so here you can see the important points that you have to remember is which form infect the human beings. So as you can see, the Anopheles mosquito, it is introducing sporozoites into the human beings. So the infective form to human beings is sporozoite. And what is the form that develops in the mosquito? So when the mosquito takes a blood meal, you can see that gametocytes are undergoing further development in the mosquito. So that's the form that undergoes further development in the mosquito. And so as fertilization is taking place in the mosquito, we can say that mosquito is the definitive host, because that's where the sexual cycle is taking place. Okay, so malarial parasite, the definitive host is the Anopheles mosquito. In humans are the intermediate hosts. And as you know, there is a pre-erythrocytic schizophrenia in human host, which occurs in the liver, and an erythrocytic schizophrenia, which occurs in the RBCs. And hypnozoites, or some textbook describe it as exoerythrocytic cycle, that is um, sleep sleeping forms or the hypnozoites that occurs in the liver. So instead of replicating in the liver in pre-erythrocytic schizophrenia, these sporozoites will remain as hypnozoites. So that is seen in Plasmodium ovale and Plasmodium vivax. Again, another important MCQ. Hypnozoites or exoerythrocytic cycle is seen with. It is seen with ovale and vivax. Okay, so what's the importance of these sleepy hypnozoites? The important is that whenever your immunity is a bit low, these hypnozoites can start a new cycle. So that's why these hypnozoites are important. So it is seen in ovale and vivax only. And next is important forms seen in peripheral blood. So you don't have to worry so much about that. The only things that you have to remember is in the RBCs, multiple rings or Accord forms. Accord forms means they are attached to the RBC membrane. That is called as the Accord form. So multiple rings and Accord forms are characteristic of Plasmodium falciparum. Another characteristic feature is crescentic gametocytes in Plasmodium falciparum. So that's the only characteristic feature that you can say. The rest of the things, they all look similar, the other species. So this one stands out with multiple rings and Accord forms and crescentic gametocytes. So that's a malarial parasite. And lab diagnosis, again important, gold standard, peripheral blood smear examination. The other things, these are the other tests that you have to read up. And LDH aldolase, these are the antigens that you can detect. And for Plasmodium falciparum, there is a histidine-rich protein 2, again specific for Plasmodium falciparum. So that's about the lab diagnosis of malarial parasite. And earlier days, this Kala Azar, they used to ask about this Kala Azar as a short essay question that could be asked. Kala Azar. Kala Azar, you don't have to worry about the life cycle. Life cycle is simple in that sandfly is the vector. You have pro-mastigot form in the sandfly and amastigot form in the human beings. That's all that you have to remember. Okay, pro-mastigot in the sandfly. So sandfly will be introducing pro-mastigots into your system, and once it reaches your body, pro-mastigots get converted to amastigot. That's all that you have to remember. Okay, and it's a reticuloendotheliosis. So peripheral blood smear, bone marrow, or splenic aspirate can be taken. And tests are also a bit different. Like remember, it's the mastigot or the LD bodies that can be seen under microscope. We stain the peripheral blood smear with Leishman stain. You stain the bone marrow aspirate with Leishman stain. You can see the LD bodies. And culture is done on NNN media. Then there are the other methods. So remember, this is how we have to proceed when it is a question on Kala Azar. Then next is filariasis. Filariasis, here you can see that adult worms are seen in the lymphatics of human beings. So wherever there are adults or wherever the sexual reproduction is taking place, that will be the definitive host. Okay, so humans are the definitive host in case of filariasis because adult worms are seen in the human lymphatics, and the mosquito, Culex mosquito, is the intermediate host where larval form develops. Okay, so microfilaria, that's the larval form that will be introduced by the mosquito into our system, and once it reaches our body in the lymphatics, they become the adult forms. Okay, and you should remember that it's a nocturnal parasite. So microfilaria will be seen in the night time. So you preferably take the blood sample during the night, and if you are taking blood sample in the daytime, give a dose of DEC. It's called as a DEC provocation test. Once you give DEC, all these microfilaria will come to the peripheral circulation and it will be easy to visualize it. Okay, then antigen detection, antibody imaging techniques are there. But again, you have to describe a peripheral blood smear examination because that's an important method for diagnosing filariasis. And it would be good if you know how to differentiate between microfilaria of Eucheraria and Brugia, because in Kerala both these forms coexist. So microfilaria, I'll tell you the features. The features are that the nuclei will not go to the tail tip, so there will be no tail tip nuclei, and you can see that the nuclei are arranged distinctly, whereas in Brugia it will all be clumped together and all. And you can see curves are very uniform in the case of Eucheraria, whereas it will be kinky in appearance in the case of Brugia, and some differences like that are there. So find out a few differences and mention that also in your answer. You mention you write about the peripheral blood smear examination. You describe the microfilaria with the help of a diagram. Okay. And now the last among this bloodstream infection, we have the systemic mycosis. Among this, the most important is the histoplasmosis, otherwise called as the Darling's disease. So first thing, a few things you can write commonly for all the systemic mycosis causing fungi are, they are all dimorphic fungi, meaning at two different temperatures, they can exist in two different forms. At 37 degrees, they occur as E's, and at 25 degrees, they occur as filamentous forms. So that is same for all the systemic mycosis causing fungi, and they are all seen in the soil, and all of them enters through inhalational route. So these 3 points you can write for all the systemic mycosis. Okay, and most of them their treatment is amphotericin B. And then we'll see the, so remember they are dimorphic, there will be a yeast form and there will be a filamentous form. So for histoplasmosis, filamentous form is characteristic in that you can see the tuberculate spores. So what I have put in the picture is finger-like projections from a spore that's called as a tuberculate spore. So that's very characteristic of histoplasmosis. Next is blastomycosis. Again, you can write it's dimorphic fungi, it's there in the soil, you acquire it by inhalation. All that pathogenesis and all you can write. It's the same. That is in the alveolar macrophages, they develop inside the macrophages, they reach the different parts of the body. All that will be same for this. And for this, yeast forms are characteristic. As you can see, there is a figure of 8 appearance. The first figure, that's for blastomycosis. That's because they have broad-based budding yeast cells. So it is broad-based, giving a figure of 8 appearance. Okay. Next is paracoccidioidomycosis. The characteristic feature is mariner's wheel or pirate's wheel appearance. So you can see multiple budding yeast cell. Again, that's an MCQ. Mariner's wheel or pilot wheel appearance of the yeast cells is characteristic of Paracoccidioides brasiliensis. And the fourth one is coccidioidomycosis causing systemic mycosis. Here, instead of the yeast form, in the tissue, they have spherules. So what is shown here is a spherule with numerous endospores in it. So that is again characteristic. Coccidiomycosis with numerous endospores inside a spherule. For all the others, the tissue form will be yeast. For coccidioidomycosis, it will be the spherule form with endospores. And then systemic candidiasis. So candidiasis, so you know that it's an oval gram-positive budding yeast cell. So these tests should be there in your answer. So to identify the different species. So germ tube test, so what you do is in the serum, human serum, you introduce the candida colonies, and after 2 hours of incubation at 37, okay, human serum, 2 hours, incubate at 37. So you can see some tube-like projections arising from the yeast cell. So that's characteristic of Candida albicans. If it appears in 2 hours, it is Candida albicans. Then chlamydospore formation is characteristic for different species. Chrome agar. So that is different color will be formed on this agar by different Candida species. So looking at the color, you can find out the Candida species. Then treatment for cutaneous, it is topiconazoles. For systemic candidiasis, you give oral fluconazole or amphotericin B. So that's how you proceed with this candidiasis. We have finished the immunology, and a very important part of systemic bacteriology, that is CVS and blood. That's very important. So you might have noticed that so many questions, so many essays are there that come from this uh, serious and blood infections. 5 marks questions, short essays, all that usually come from this system. So it's a very important system. I think I have covered most of that. The topics that I usually asked for, asked as an essay, short essay, or a long essay. So, is there anything else that you want to discuss from this? If not, we'll move on to the next set of systems. Okay, can you see the slide now? Now is it visible? Okay. So now we'll move on to the skin, soft tissue, and musculoskeletal system interaction. So it's a long thing. So many organisms we come across in this. So we'll see the most important ones. First one is Staphylococcus aureus. Usually, they don't ask essay questions from the Staph aureus, but they can ask 5 marks questions, obviously, like lab diagnosis of Staph aureus and all, they can ask. So, Staphylococcus aureus, that's one important question, lab diagnosis. And lab diagnosis is very simple for Staphylococcus aureus. You don't have any complicated media and all. We have the common media like blood agar, nutrient agar, common tests like catalase test, coagulase test, etc. So, that's not a problem. So these are some of the points that you have to remember. So MRSA, so you should know that MEC-A gene codes for that, because these are all MCQ questions. MEC-A gene codes for the MRSA. And what happens when there is a MEC-A gene? The penicillin binding protein will be converted to PBP2A. That is what happens. So the penicillin binding will be not be possible here. All the beta-lactam antibiotics can't bind onto this cell of your Staphylococcus aureus. And drug of choice is vancomycin. Okay. And then there is VRSA, vancomycin resistant Staphylococcus aureus. So that is determined by MIC, minimum inhibitory concentration. So VAN-A gene is responsible for that. If you find MIC more than 16 for vancomycin, it is VRSA. Then there is an intermediate sensitive Staphylococcus aureus, vancomycin intermediate sensitive, where the MIC is between 4 and 8. Okay, so this is how how they are different. MRSA, VRSA, and VISA are different. So as I said, lab diagnosis is easy, and for every lab diagnosis, there should be all these headings. So it should proceed like this. There should be specimen collection. So where depending upon the system affected, you can take the specimen. Then microscopy. So with the gram staining or whatever you are performing, you have to write under that. Then culture and identification. Remember, culture as well as identification. Then a note on antimicrobial susceptibility testing and the treatment options available. So that is how you have to proceed. So culture, as I said, this is very simple. We have a pigmented golden yellow pigmented colonies on nutrient agar and beta lytic colonies on blood agar. Culture is simple. Now you have to identify it. It is identified by again two simple tests: right catalase test and coagulase test. Both are positive for Staphylococcus aureus, and then you can write your favorite things: Vitek and Malditop, wherever facilities are available. Okay, so that's about Staphylococcus aureus. So these are the tests and these are the media that you should definitely write. Then Streptococcus pyogenes. So I'm not going into the lab diagnosis and all that. So the one thing that you forget when you write about lab diagnosis of Streptococcus pyogenes is how do you diagnose non-suppurative complications. You have to include that as well in your lab diagnosis. Okay, so lab diagnosis of infections, lab diagnosis of non-suppurative complications. So these two headings should be there for lab diagnosis of Streptococcus pyogenes. So rheumatic fever, it is ASO more than 200. Then if it is glomerulonephritis, anti-TNSB 300 to 350 IU per ml. So just include that in the lab diagnosis. Then group B streptococcus, it is important in that it causes neonatal meningitis. Again, an MCQ. So among the streptococcus, the one which causes neonatal meningitis is group B streptococcus. And it is said to be CAM test positive. Okay, so this is how you do a CAM test. Again, you have to draw the diagram. So it's done on a blood agar, and you can see that there is Staph aureus and Streptococcus agalacti or group B streptococcus inoculated perpendicular to each other. Then what happens on incubation? You can see an increased zone of hemolysis. That's all. Okay, so it's done on blood agar, perpendicular to each other. You are drawing Staph aureus and Strep agalacti. So next day after incubation, you see an increased zone of hemolysis. Okay. Then enterococcus, again another important streptococcus that you should read up, causing UTI wound infection. Again, that's important. Gas gangrene can be asked as an essay question. So, following a road traffic accident, a person presented to you with crush injuries, and there was crepitus on examination. This is how they are asked. They ask. I mean, the essay questions will be like the framed like that. So, important etiological agents you have to write, and pathogenesis you should include the toxins, alpha and beta toxins. And remember, for lab diagnosis, do not write swabs. You have to write muscle fragments and exudates from deeper part of the wound. And I hope you remember target hemolysis, where you get double zone of hemolysis. And here comes the reverse CAM test, where you are using not Staphylococcus but group B streptococcus and Clostridium perfringens. Again, another MCQ. Reverse CAM test is shown by. So it's shown by Clostridium perfringens. Then another feature is acid and gas production leading to Sturmy Claude reaction in the litmus milk fermentation. Okay, litmus milk fermentation, Sturmy Claude reaction because of acid and gas production. And leprosy, two things that you have to remember. Lepromin test is different from lepra reaction. Usually we get confused. Okay, lepromin test is different from lepra reactions. So lepromin test is something that we do to identify whether the cell-mediated immune response of a patient. So you do it just like a manto. You're giving lepromin antigen intradermally, and you get induration and erythema after 24 to 48 hours. So just like a tuberculin reaction, and just like that, it carries with it significance. It just means that you had contact with this lepra bacillus. The more important reaction is the late reaction of Mitsuda. It's more meaningful. So it appears after 21 days. So you get a nodule at the site of your inoculation, about 5 millimeter size, which later ulcerates. And do you know why it is important or more significant? That is because the late reactions tells you the cell-mediated immunity of that person against lepra bacillus. Okay, the actual cell-mediated immunity of that person will be seen. Will be if he develops this nodule like that, that means he can mount an immune response against lepra bacillus. So that's why it is considered to be meaningful. And then you have to write what's the use of lepromin test. Never for diagnosis. It is not used to diagnose leprosy. So you can classify lesions of the leprosy patient, that is whether it is tuberculoid leprosy or lepromatous leprosy and so on, and how the patient is responding to the treatment, how is his prognosis. All these can be got by doing this lepromin test. Then lepra reactions, please read up the lepra reactions. That's following treatment or following an improvement or decrease in the immunity of a patient, some lesions appear in his body. That's the lepra reaction. Just read that so that you don't confuse between lepra reactions and lepromin test. Okay. Next is anthrax. Anthrax is a favorite MCQ topic. That is, we get different names for this anthrax, like malignant pustule. So malignant pustule is associated with which organism? Hyde-Potter's disease is caused by. Wool-Sorter's disease is caused by. McFadden's reaction is used to identify which of the following organisms. So these are the questions that you get. So McFadden's is you are identifying or demonstrating the capsule of the anthrax bacilli by staining with polychrome methylene blue. Okay, polychrome methylene blue, McFadden's to demonstrate the polypeptide capsule of anthrax bacillus. So these are the usual questions that you get from this. Moving on to viral exanthems. So these are short essays. Chickenpox, zoster, so all these, there is a varicella zoster virus infection that can be asked. So write the clinical manifestations, lab diagnosis, treatment, and add a note on the vaccine as well. Another important question is human papilloma virus. So you know that it is associated with malignancy as well, the serotype 16 and 18. So it's very important. And also it's a vaccine preventable malignancy. So that makes it all the more important. So uh, definitely you have to read chickenpox, zoster, and human papilloma virus. Then these are the other ones that could be asked: mpox, measles, and rubella, and obviously the vaccine. So last time one short essay question was MMR vaccine. Okay, that was asked as a short essay. So don't have to worry. You just have to name the different strains of the vaccine and the schedule of the vaccine. That's all. But you should know that it can be asked as a short essay question. Then next one is cutaneous larva migrans. So you should know how or when this cutaneous larva migrans develop. So when non-human helminths infect human beings, this develops. Or uh, when a helminth is infecting an already sensitized individual, already the person who already had an infection with the same helminth, that helminth is again trying to enter the body after some time. This human being will have developed immune response against the antigen. So what happens is this helminth finds difficult to enter into the deeper organs. So it will be confined to the layers of the skin. So these are the two instances where you get cutaneous larva migrans. One is when non-human, like dog Ascaris, the dog hookworm, or hookworm of other animals try to enter your body, or when human helminths like ankylostoma or strongyloids try to enter an already sensitized individual. That's when this happens. Okay, so you have to describe all that, how it enters and all. And thiobendazole is used for treatment. Next important topic is dermatophytosis. Again, a short essay question. So this short essay, remember you have to classify dermatophytosis as clinical type. So depending upon the area affected, you can classify dermatophytosis, and also you can classify based on the types of dermatophytes. You have trichophyton, microsporum, epidermophyton. So you tell the different sites infected by this, the characteristic morphology. For example, trichophyton will have abundant microponidia, whereas microsporum and epidermophyton they have macroponidia, spindle-shaped macroponidia for microsporum, and club-shaped macroponidia for epidermophyton, and so on. So, so you have to describe in two ways. That is, clinical types should be described as well as the etiological agents should be described when you are writing the dermatitis. Okay, and the other tests, hyperphoresia test, etc. Treatment, oral terbinafine or itraconazole, oral griseovalvin, ketoconazole. These are the drug options available. Then this is a very important short essay question: subcutaneous mycosis. And among this, mycetoma itself that has been asked as a short essay question. So these are the subcutaneous mycosis, important ones: mycetoma, chromoblastomycosis, sporotrichosis, and rhinosporidiosis. So mycosis, mycetoma, you should know that there is a fungal mycetoma, eumycotic mycetoma, then there is an actinomycotic mycetoma. There, as a similar picture is seen, or similar clinical manifestation is seen with botryomycosis, where staphylococcus and other pyogenic bacteria cause a similar infection. Okay, so know the etiological agent, and this is the clinical triad, where what do you see? You see swelling, discharging sinuses, and granules. So you can see the slides now.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, swelling, discharging sinuses, and granules in the discharge. And you take the granules to find out the etiological agency. You are collecting the granules by sterile gauze and you crush it between the slides and look for the etiological agent. So, actinomycotic, they are filamentous bacteria. Eumycotic, that's the fungal ones with hyphae. So, these two things you can see under microscope. And differentiation is also easy. That is, actinomycotic, you can see thin filaments. Eumycotic, it will be broader. Color of the granules also will help you to identify the etiological agent. White to yellow granules are seen for actinomyces, whereas fungal granules mostly they will be black. And treatment also, as you can see, it is different for actinomycotic and eumycotic. Culture on SDA or Lowenstein-Jensen media, and after culture you can identify based on morphology. And obviously, eumycotic will have to be treated with antifungals like itraconazole and amphotericin B, and actinomycotic, amikacin plus or triamcinolone. Then this is chromoblastomycosis where you can see warty lesions on the skin. Wart-like lesions can be seen, usually seen in agricultural workers and wood cutters. And it will be good if you can remember the etiological agents Ponsacea, Piellophora, and Cladosporium. One of the characteristic morphological form is sclerotic bodies. Again, definitely you have to mention that. That is, sclerotic bodies are characteristic yeast-like bodies seen on histopathologic examination. Sclerotic bodies. And of course, you can do a culture on Sabrod agar. You remove it surgically, and antifungal, which will be helpful, will be itraconazole. And sporotrichosis, that has been asked as a short essay question, and once it was asked as rose gardener's disease. So that was the question. So remember, sporotrichosis is rose gardener's disease. You get it by thorn pricks or minor injuries. Usually it is confined to the skin and lymphatics. So we can see the nodules developing here, and they soften and break down to form ulcers. This is how the disease presents. And lymphocutaneous type is the most common. As I said, lymph nodes and skin, usually confined to that. Lymphocutaneous is the commonest manifestation. In India, we see that in the northeastern states, Himachal Pradesh, Assam, etc. KOH mount is to be the same for all. You can take the bus, you can do a KOH mount, you can do a histopathological staining. Here, the characteristic feature is asteroid body. So you can see that there is a central fungus, and from the eosinophilic material is radiating. That's the asteroid body. Okay, eosinophilic material radiating from the central fungus. It's called as the asteroid body or the splendour Hopley phenomenon. Again, an MCQ. Asteroid body for sporotrichosis, sclerotic body for chromoblastomycosis. So this is a dimorphic fungi. I told you about the systemic mycosis causing fungi. They are all dimorphic. Likewise, Sporothrix is a dimorphic fungi. So it will have a yeast form and a characteristic mycelial form. As you can see, flower-like clusters, like arrangement of conidia. Conidia in flower-like clusters. So that is characteristic. Treatment, itraconazole, amphotericin B can be given for treatment. Then moving on to rhinosporidiosis, where you get friable polyps in nose, mouth, or eye, affecting the mucous membrane. And you get spherules with endospores. So earlier we had seen spherules for our coccidioidomycosis. This is another organism, Rhinosporidium seabird, which again the tissue form is spherule with lots of endospores. And now they are saying that this Rhinosporidium seabird, it's not a fungus, it's an aquatic protestant parasite. Maybe that's why we are not able to cultivate it, because it's a protestant parasite rather than a fungus. Treatment, you cauterize it, you give dabs on. So whatever you do, recurrence is commonly seen. Then one another important essay question is this diphtheria. So usually the question goes like this: there is an unimmunized child with grayish white membrane on the tonsils, presenting with fever, toxemia plus. So that will be the question. So this all points to the diagnosis of diphtheria. So action of toxin is very important because that contributes to your pathogenesis. And the specimen obviously will have to take a throat swab from the membrane. And microscopy, you do gram stain, mention the special stains, Albert's and Neisser's as well. Culture is done on chocolate agar, blood agar, and another enriched media for our diphtheria bacillus is Loeffler's serum slope. And then there is a selective media, potassium telluride agar. Then mention how you detect the toxin as well. Okay, so not only culture, wherever there is a toxin production, mention the detection of the toxin. So LX gel precipitation is one method by which you can detect the toxin. So or ELISA can be used, PCR to detect the toxin G. These are used, and LX gel precipitation that can be asked as an MCQ as well. That is LX gel precipitation is used in the detection of which toxin. So you detect diphtheria toxin virus. That is, you have a filter paper with antitoxin. You inoculate the strains, and the strains will produce toxin. And wherever the toxin and antitoxin meet, you will get a precipitin line. That's all. Okay, toxin meeting antitoxin, producing a precipitin line. Treatment: antidiphtheritic serum and penicillin or erythromycin can be given. And now moving on to bacterial or lobar pneumonia. Pneumococcal pneumonia is very important. So here they give, and also meningitis is also another important infection associated with pneumococcal. So there will be in the question, if you they are definitely pointing at the diagnosis of pneumococcal pneumonia, they will give these things like a gram-positive flame-shaped cocci was seen in the gram stain smear of the sputum or gram stain smear of the CSF. So obviously you have to write about pneumococcal. And three important tests for pneumococci are bile solubility, inulin fermentation, and optogen sensitivity. Very, very important. So these three should be there in your answer. And another important point is pneumococcal vaccine. So definitely they will ask about prophylaxis in the as a sub question. So pneumococcal vaccine, you have a 23 valent polysaccharide vaccine and a conjugate vaccine. So it is conjugated to DPT or some other vaccines. So it will be more immunogenic. It will be given, it can be given to children, and this is the one which will give you mucosal immunity. So just read up the differences between the two vaccines, and it is very important. And next one is Haemophilus influenzae. Again, it can cause pneumonia as well as it can cause your meningitis. So satellitism test. So see, you have a in the center on the blood agar, you have a Staphylococcus aureus strain streaked into this. So you have already inoculated the CSF sample. Perpendicular to that, inoculate the Staph aureus. So next day, what you see is towards the Staphylococcus, the colonies are bigger. That's because Staphylococci produce NAD, which is an important growth factor for H influenza. Okay, so Staph aureus produces NAD, which is an important growth factor for Haemophilus influenza. That's why colonies closer to Staph aureus will be bigger. Okay, and again the vaccine for this is important. Polyribosyl ribitol phosphate capsular antigen. That's the KIP vaccine. Polyribosyl ribitol phosphate capsular antigen is included in the KIP vaccine. Then always you get questions on this atypical pneumonia, mostly MCQs. Which among these causes atypical pneumonia? So remember, respiratory viruses cause atypical pneumonia, and then there are bacteria, Mycoplasma pneumonia, Chlamydia, Legionella, important ones associated with atypical pneumonia. So that means the lung interstitial tissue is involved in atypical pneumonia. So there won't be cough or other symptoms, but X-ray will show evidence of the infection. Okay, so that's atypical pneumonia. These are the important bacteria: Mycoplasma pneumoniae, Chlamydia, and Legionella. Important bacteria associated with atypical pneumonia. Then tuberculosis is another important essay question. So we'll have chronic cough and patient presenting with weight loss. So that's the class history that you get for tuberculosis. Okay, chronic cough and weight loss. And in the pathogenesis, you have to include these two. That is, cell-mediated immunity is important in the pathogenesis. So we have two things can occur following this. That is, there is a macrophage activating response, which leads to tubercle formation, and actually that is giving you immunity against further infection. And there also can be a tissue damaging response due to a cell-mediated immune response. If it is progressing like that, then caseous necrosis and the patient actually develops the whole disease. Okay, that disease spectrum will manifest in that person. So both are due to the cell-mediated immune response. Either it could be a macrophage activating response, which is good for you, or it could be a tissue damaging response, which leads to caseous necrosis, and that is the infection, tuberculosis. Then humoral immune response, it does not have much role in immunity in tuberculosis. Lab diagnosis, remember to include all these things. You can have to take specimen. Obviously, it will be sputum for pulmonary tuberculosis or for extrapulmonary, depending upon the site affected, it varies. So for sputum, you do what you do is you have to do this digestion, decontamination, and concentration of sputum by Petrov's or the Nalsey method. Be sure to write that. Okay, before proceeding to microscopy, you write this sentence. And then microscopy, three methods are the classical Ziel-Nielsen technique, the Cole method called as the Quinions, and the fluorescence staining, which is said to be more sensitive. Okay. These are the methods. And culture, again, conventional methods are there and automated methods are there. So you write about that. Molecular methods, this IS6110 gene, very important, PCR can be used. Then CB-NAT and line-braun assay, a few sentences about each of these you have to write. And finally, you have to mention latent tuberculosis diagnosis by Mantoux test or interferon gamma release assay, IGRA, or the interferon gamma release assay. So that's for latent tuberculosis. Just write a note on that as well for completion's sake. Then atypical mycobacteria, usually they about the MAC. They ask about the MAC. They can ask again. It can be asked as a short essay question. You don't have to worry because you write the few points that's available. You will get full marks for that. And also, this is an MCQ question. That is, MAC infection is seen commonly in persons with CD4 T cell counts less than 50. That's the common question that they ask. Then lymphadenitis, respiratory infection, and disseminated disease. That's how MAC infection develops. So Mycobacterium avium complex. So that includes Mycobacterium avium and Mycobacterium intracellular. That's why it's called as the complex. Okay. And multi-drug therapy, macrolide, ethambutol, and rifampicin. Combination of these drugs is given for treatment. The usual anti-tuberculous therapy, it's not beneficial in this atypical mycobacterial infections. Okay, next short essay question is milioidosis caused by Burkholderia pseudomallei. Please read up that. It's called as the Vietnam time bomb, great mimicker because it can mimic different diseases. It can mimic enteric fever, typhoid fever, typhus fever, tuberculosis. You name the disease, it could mimic all these. So that's a very important question. Milioidosis. Please read up that. Then influenza virus. The common influenza virus can be asked as an essay question. So there you will be given a question like the patient presenting with fever, but there is it's not product no productive copies there, but the X-ray showed interstitial infiltrates and the bacterial culture was sterile. So that points to viral infection. And you can write about any viral infection, doesn't matter. It doesn't give a clue as to the etiological agent. You can write about influenza virus, you can write about COVID-19, you can even write about adenovirus. But before committing to any of these viruses, please see the sub-question. So if the sub-question has mentioned the antigenic variation seen in this virus, I will definitely write influenza virus then, because antigenic variation seen in COVID, it's long, it could be very long, and that virus is continually undergoing so many changes that you might not be updated. So if they are specifically asking for antigenic variations in the etiological agent, it's the safest option is to write about influenza virus, because it's very easy to write about the antigenic variation in influenza virus. So morphology, the important things that you have to remember is, as you can see, it's a segmented virus with 8 segments of RNA. Okay, so you can see the 8 segments. And the surface antigens are heme agglutinin and neuraminidase. Surface antigens, heme agglutinin, neuraminidase. So these are the important points that you have to remember. And as I mentioned about the antigenic variation, this is the antigenic variation that you see in the influenza virus. So you have an antigenic drift and an antigenic shift. So remember, shift is a major change. You are shifting. So remember, shift is a major change. Drift is a small change. This small change drift usually occurs by mutation and selection. Whereas the big change, it cannot be due to mutation because it is so huge. It's usually due to genetic recombination. And drift, that small change can occur even in influenza A or B. It can occur every once in 2 to 3 years. This antigenic shift, it usually occurs in influenza A, and that occurs once in 10 to 20 years. And the major change leads to pandemics. The minor change drift leads to epidemics. Okay, so minor change is drift, which happens by mutation and selection, and it causes epidemics. And major change, what we call as antigenic shift, it is due to genetic recombination, and it can cause pandemics. And lab diagnosis, as I already mentioned, for all viruses, you can write as antigen detection, antibody detection, isolation of the virus, and molecular methods. These are the headings. You have to read up the important antigens that can be detected in each of these, which are antibody detection methods, isolation, like primary multi-kidney cell lines, which all the cell lines use. That should be there, but the headings you can remember like this. Okay. Then other important viruses, mumps, COVID-19, IMN. Short answer questions. Also, COVID-19 can be asked as an essay question. Like they can mention that this one caused a recent pandemic. Then obviously they are pointing to COVID-19. So I think the previous year or before that, one question was about this COVID-19, the one which caused a recent pandemic. They asked like that. So that could be asked as an essay question. Now, paragonimiasis, that's the lung fluke. The other names are the oriental lung fluke. The disease is otherwise called as the endemic hemoptysis. And as you can see, we have this adult worm in the human being. This adult worm will release the embryonated eggs, and that embryonated eggs will develop in the water in the snail and crayfish or other crustaceans. So two intermediate hosts, snails and crustaceans like crayfish. Okay, so two intermediate hosts, and humans are the definitive hosts. Zygomycosis, again another short essay. Rhinocerebral mucormycosis, pulmonary mucormycosis, disseminated mucormycosis, all these are presentations, and amphotericin B is used for treatment. And when you write this, you can definitely draw the diagram of mucor and rhizopus. Very easy. Mucor has got sporangium with sporangiospores. Rhizopus also has sporangium with sporangiospores, but it also has got rhizoids. And both these have aseptate hybrid. So you can draw the diagram as well. Moving on to the important CNS infection, tetanus. Tetanus, that can be asked after a puncture with a puncture wound or following road traffic accidents and all this, it can present. So muscle spasms will be there. So that will be the clue to your diagnosis. Muscle spasms will be there. And opisthotonus, that's the posture, what it is called, generalized spastic contraction of the extensor muscles. Then poliomyelitis, again another important question. So vaccines of poliovirus, that's very important. So poliomyelitis, it starts as an intestinal epithelial infection. Also, it multiplies it enters through the GI tract, enters the bloodstream, causing primary and secondary viremia, finally reaching the anterior horn cells of the spinal cord. So that's the area where you get the pathogenesis. And the earliest change is changes occurring in the ribosomes, that is the missile bodies, degeneration of these missile bodies occur. So usually they ask about, so lab diagnosis important points to remember are, see the samples taken, you take throat swabs and stool samples. Okay, throat swab, stool samples or rectal swabs are taken. So that you have to remember, though it is affecting the central nervous system, these are the samples that are taken because viral isolation is maximum from these samples. So that's important to remember. And vaccines, we have two different types of vaccine, oral and injectable. Oral is the live vaccine and injectable is the inactivated vaccine. When you read about this, OPV or the oral polio vaccine is associated with the VAPP, vaccine associated paralytic polio, and vaccine derived polio viruses are there. Please read about that as well because you have to mention that when they are asking about the vaccines in poliomyelitis. Okay, so OPV vaccine, IPV vaccine, what is VAPP and what is VDPV, you have to mention. And also, pulse polio immunization should be there when you are writing about the polio vaccines. And I hope you know that India is declared polio free from March 2014 onwards. India has been declared polio free. Okay, so PPI, this pulse polio immunization, was very fundamental eliminating or uh, in making India polio free, pulse polio immunization. And the last parts, we are moving on to the last parts of microbiology. Okay, Japanese encephalitis. Again, you might have seen so many MCQs, NEET exams, okay, you might have encountered so many MCQs based on just this picture. So this picture is very, very important. So as you can see, there is a mosquito, it is the Culex mosquito, and this Culex mosquito is spreading the encephalitis, Japanese encephalitis virus between the pigs and the birds. Birds are herons. So actually, that's a natural cycle occurring for Japanese encephalitis between the pigs and birds. And from the picture, it is obvious that humans are the dead end host. From the human, there is no human to human transmission, and also we are the accidental host. Okay, we are the accidental dead end host. Okay, so that's one question. Humans are dead end hosts, or you can say they are the accidental hosts. Which is the reservoir for Japanese encephalitis virus? The birds. Herons are the reservoirs. And what about the pig? Pigs are the amplifier hosts. Pigs are the amplifier host for the Japanese encephalitis virus. So it's a very important MCQ based on this Japanese encephalitis. Okay, humans, dead end host or accidental host, amplifier host, pig, reservoir host, the birds, heron. Okay, moving on to rabies. Rabies, the usual problem that we see when we go for valuation is about the lab diagnosis. Lab diagnosis, you have to specifically write under these two headings. That is, there is an ante-mortem diagnosis and post-mortem diagnosis. So we tend to write about this Negri body so often that we forget that this Negri body detection is possible only post-mortem, meaning it's there in your cerebellum and hippocampus. Nobody is going to take a biopsy from cerebellum or hippocampus from a live person. So Negri body detection is only post-mortem. Okay, and ante-mortem diagnosis, you take the skin from the nape of the neck, where you can detect the antigen by direct immunofluorescence, or you can even try isolation of the virus from those samples. Then CSF antibody will be helpful in diagnosis. Then viral RNA detection from all these samples, that is also possible. So the usual problem that we see is about this Negri body only for post-mortem diagnosis. And another important question is this rabies vaccine. I hope you all know that now we are doing this intradermal rabies vaccine. This is a post-exposure prophylaxis, 037. There is no 14-day dose. We have a 28-day dose. So 2 sites on the deltoid region intradermally, 2202. So there is no dose on the 14th day. It was the for the intramuscular regimen. It's not there for your intradermal. There is no 14th day. So that also you have to remember. Rabies vaccine, again important. Then prion diseases, just read about these things, this Kuru, CJD, GSS, and fatal familial insomnia. So that is, this Kuru is affecting, is causing, it causes ataxia and all. Whereas the next two, that is CJD and Gerstmann's Torster, dementia is the most important feature. Okay, Kuru with ataxia, dementia in the next two, and fatal familial insomnia, as the name says, you will have insomnia, also autonomic disturbances will be there. That's how fatal familial insomnia presents. So read about that as well. Then in the recent question papers, you might have noticed this is a very commonly asked question these days. Pre-living amoeba or the brain-eating amoeba. So many names are there. Or the amoeba which affects the central nervous system. So these are those amoeba. Please read that, very important, and it's very easy to understand about these. The life cycle and are all very simple, but you should at least read once, otherwise you won't be able to write. So these are the important amoeba causing CNS infection. Primary amoebic meningoencephalitis caused by Naegleria fowleri. The Acanthamoeba malamithia causes granulomatous amoebic encephalitis. And sapenia, there is one reported case of encephalitis due to sapenia. So this is very important. Make a note that you have to read this. So it's repeatedly asked in the previous years as well as in the CBME also, they are asking this question. Okay, coming to the end of our session, a few more slides remaining. One of the important parasitic infection, toxoplasmosis. This toxoplasmosis, it is important in immunodeficient individuals because it causes encephalitis. In an immunocompetent individual, it's not much of a problem. Problem is only in pregnant women who might vertically transmit this infection to the fetus. Otherwise, in an immunocompetent individual, it's not a problem. So this diagram is very important. And looking at this diagram, we can identify so many things. Like for example, just see where the oocyst develops. So looking at the diagram, it is obvious that oocysts develop in the cats, and cat is the definitive host. So two important MCQs. Oocysts develop in the host, in the definitive host, which is the cat. Okay, oocyst in cat. And once the other animals consume these oocysts, in them tissue cysts develop. Okay, tissue cysts develop. And the next question is how, which are the forms infective to man? So one thing is clear, that is we have the animal you are eating in which the tissue cysts develop. If you are eating improperly cooked meat, there the infective form enters your body. So tissue cysts can be infective to human beings. What about oocysts? These oocysts, it will contaminate your food, your drink. So if there is oocyst in your food or drink, again it can enter your body and cause infection. And fondling of cats, again that can cause transmission of infection. So in human beings, you can say that both oocyst as well as tissue cyst is infective. Okay, both oocysts and tissue cysts are infective to human beings, and oocysts develop only in the cats. Okay. Then diagnosis, microscopy, GMZA, and a chain stain can be done using blood, and there are tissue cysts developing. You can see the radizoids in the tissue. Mainstay of diagnosis is we look for the antibodies by ELISA. And this Sabin-Feldman test, that's of historic importance. That was the first test done to detect antibody. And nowadays we have even molecular methods. And as I said, usually in immunocompetent individuals, we do not have to worry so much. But if toxoplasmosis affects an immunodeficient individual, like a HIV positive individual, you treat it with cotrimoxazole. Okay, you treat with an antibacterial agent, cotrimoxazole. That's the treatment. And this is another important short essay, that is neurocysticercosis. So here, how you get infected by this organism, and the etiological agent causing neurocysticercosis is Taenia solium. Okay, Taenia solium or the pig tapeworm is responsible for cysticercosis. Okay, so we know that when you consume improperly cooked pork, which has this cysticercus cellulose, that's the larvae. So you consume that larvae in the pig. That larvae reaches your body in the intestine. It becomes the adult. So that's how you develop intestinal teniasis. So in order that you develop intestinal teniasis, you have to you have to intake pig meat. That pig should have this cysticercus cellulose larvae. Okay, uh, but how do you get cysticercosis? Cysticercosis means the larvae is developing in your body. So you don't have to by heart all these. The only thing that you have to remember is when you consume egg, it becomes larvae in your body. Okay, egg becomes the next stage, that is larvae. And when you consume larvae, the larvae becomes the next stage, that is adult in your body. Okay, so the first thing we have seen that the pig containing larvae, you are taking that meat. When larvae is consumed, it becomes adult in your intestine. And suppose this pig, it's not the pig, in the case of vegetarians, so you have this adult, there is an adult with intestinal teniasis. He will be shedding this tenia eggs in his feces. So water sources or food sources, vegetables might get contaminated with that. And when you're consuming that food or water with the egg, so what happens when you consume the egg? It becomes the larvae. So that's how you develop cysticercosis. So it's not just by eating the pork that you develop cysticercosis. If you consume egg in water or contaminated vegetables, then also you develop cysticercosis. Okay, so you have to consume egg to develop cysticercosis. That's why it is said that even vegetarians can get neurocysticercosis. But intestinal teniasis can be seen only in those taking pork, because larvae is taken and that becomes adult in your body. So that is intestinal teniasis. Neurocysticercosis, it's the larvae developing from the egg. So in whichever way the egg enters your body, you can get cysticercosis. Okay, and for diagnosis of cysticercosis, you have to mention the imaging studies. You don't. So for all the parasitology questions, we have a tendency that we write about the examination of the stool sample. But for cysticercosis, an even better method will be imaging studies, because neurocysticercosis, it's developing in the brain. You can do a CT, you can do an MRI. You might not even see the eggs in the stool sample if it is a vegetarian who is having cysticercosis. So diagnosis concentrate on imaging studies, not on stool examination. And treatment, albendazole or praziquantel is given. And also it's developing in the brain. Obviously the person can develop seizures, so anti-epileptics and steroids can be given when you give albendazole, when the inflammatory reaction occurs once this larvae dies, then you'll have to deal with that by giving steroids. So that is what is meant by symptomatic treatment. And the last we have sexually transmitted infections and urinary tract infection. So urinary tract infection, I don't know if it is there in Apurva Shastri, the screening test. So remember, again, when you are asked to write about the lab diagnosis of urinary tract infection, half marks is for the screening test and half marks it's for the culture. Okay, so remember to write the screening test like wet mount examination, gram staining of the urine sample, or catalase test performed using the urine sample, nitrate test, so many other. At least write 3 or 4 screening tests and describe that. Okay, and then you move on to culture. Culture again simple, on blood agar and confi agar. You do the culture, identify the growth by means of conventional methods, do antimicrobial susceptibility, all those points you can write. Okay, but mention the screening test. So that's what we usually miss for UTI. Then last we have the sexually transmitted diseases, the most important being the syphilis. So syphilis, we have primary, secondary, latent syphilis and tertiary syphilis. So primary, the symptoms that we see are a heart chancre, which is a painless chancre, associated with painless lymphadenopathy. That's the primary stage. Secondary stage it's characterized by skin rashes, condylomata lacta, and mucus patches. Okay, so first we have the genital lesion, heart chancre, and lymphadenopathy. Then secondary, where multiplication occurs in different parts of the body, you get skin rashes, condylomata lacta, and mucus patches. That is followed by a latent syphilis where only the serological test will be positive. There won't be any clinical symptoms. And last, we have the tertiary symptoms where it's actually hypersensitivity to our trypanosoma pallidum, where gamma aneurysms and neurosyphilis develops. Okay. More important than this is the lab diagnosis. So, microscopy in the diagnosis of syphilis. So again, it's a spirochete. So gram stain and all, it doesn't work. You can do a direct immunofluorescence staining, or you can do silver impregnation. So microscopy, these are the two things that you can do. Then serological tests, we have tests using cardiolipin antigen, that is VDRL, RTR, etc. These are called as a non-tryponimal test because we are using the cardiolipin antigen. And then there are tests which use the treponema pallidum antigen, your TPHA, treponema pallidum hemagglutination, treponema pallidum immobilization, then the fluorescent treponema antibody absorption test, treponema pallidum particle agglutination. All these are the tests which use treponema pallidum antigen. So these are the different types of tests that you can do to diagnose our syphilis. And other important sexually transmitted diseases, we have lymphogranuloma venereum and gonococcal urethritis. So gonococcal urethritis, actually years back that was asked as an essay question, gonococcal urethritis. So remember, in gonococcal urethritis, you don't get any genital lesions. Okay, the patient will present with urethritis. Okay, urethritis. So symptoms will be of urethritis, and there won't be any genital lesion as such if she is presenting early. Okay, so there won't be any genital lesion. The person will have urethritis. So if the question does not have a genital lesion, it is more in favor of gonococcal urethritis. Or rather, if there is a mention of genital lesion, it is safer not to write gonococcal infection because it's just a urethritis and it's not causing a genital lesion. We'll see the diseases causing genital lesion. It's there in your uh, textbook. So some points that we'll just go through easily for easy identification of the disease. So see, only two will have painful lesions. One is genital herpes and the other one is chancroid. Okay, painful lesions in genital herpes and chancroid. Okay, and uh, the painful lymph nodes are seen in all except two. You can see that syphilis, it is painless, and donovanosis, actually there is no lymph node enlargement. It is actually a subcutaneous swelling. So painless lymph node in syphilis, no lymph node in donovanosis. The genital herpes, chancroid, and LGV all have painful lymph node enlargement. And treatment also very easy. Syphilis, we know it is penicillin. For herpes, the drug will be acyclovir. And for donovanosis and chancroid, we have azithromycin. And for LGV, we have doxycycline. So this table, it's very important. It's important because this is helpful for you to answer MCQs as well as your essay questions. So see, in this, the manifestation of genito-ulcerative diseases, that's the comparison of manifestation of genito-ulcerative diseases. That is the table. So see, there is no gonococcal infection here because gonococcal infection is a urethritis rather than a ulcerative disease. So it won't be seen here. So I think I have covered most of the important topics in microbiology. So is there anything else that you want to, I mean, if you have any queries, you can ask now. Otherwise, we will wind up the session. And if you have queries later on, then also feel free to contact me. You can WhatsApp me. I'll try to answer your queries as much as possible. So feel free to contact me. You can WhatsApp me. Okay. Ah, it's okay. I can share that. No problem. Okay, okay. Then thank you, everyone. So we'll wind up the class for now. Okay, I wish that will be helpful to all. Okay, sure. Okay, okay, sure. Okay, sure, sure. Thank you. Okay, we'll wind up. Thank you.